Okay. Okay, so now we can begin, and we'll start with the 3 bows to the Buddha. 1, 2, 3. And then recite the verse of homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, good morning, everybody. Okay, so we will be continuing now with our reading of the Anguttara Nikaya Book of Fours. And today I'm going to focus mainly on some suttas in the 90s dealing with the relationship of samatha and vipassana, serenity and insight. But as a way of sort of preparing us for understanding those suttas, I'm going to jump to a later sutta in the Book of Fours, which will help us to understand the relationship of samatha and vipassana. And I discussed this sutta when we had the Abhidhamma retreat. So for those people who attended that retreat, this might be a little bit repetitive, but still I should go through the sutta. So this sutta is number 170 in the Book of Fours. And apparently it is taking place after the passing away of the Buddha, because it doesn't mention any place where the Buddha was dwelling. So it just starts off with the Venerable Ananda, who's dwelling in Kosambi, in a certain park at Kosambi. And then he begins by saying that any bhikkhu or bhikkhuni, any monk or nun who has declared the attainment of arahantship to him has done so in one of 4 ways. So the first way is the monk, or it could be the nun, develops insight preceded by serenity. So in this case, serenity, samatha, comes first, followed by vipassana, by insight. So samatha first, and then vipassana or insight. And then as they are developing first serenity, then insight, the path is generated. And there's actually some difference of opinion what is meant by the path here. A difference of opinion, interestingly, between the commentary and the sub-commentary. I think I pointed out in the note. Yeah, the commentary to the Anguttara Nikaya explains what's meant by the path here as the first world transcending path. That is the path of stream entry. But then the sub-commentary says, this is said with reference to the path of stream entry, but the meaning of this passage can be understood simply by way of the mundane or preparatory path. So it's not quite clear exactly what is meant here by the path. But it seems that what arises is an irreversible path, that when that path has arisen, then one is bound, definite, certain to achieve the fruit of the path. And that would be at the first stage, the fruit of stream entry. And so the text says, one pursues this path, develops it and cultivates it. And as one is doing so, the fetters are abandoned and the underlying tendencies are uprooted. And so what are the fetters that are abandoned and the underlying tendencies that are uprooted? Okay, for this, what I found is helpful is there's a work included in the Sutta Pitaka, but it's a later work called the Patisambhida Magga. Can you see it on my screen?
Yes, very small, Bhante.
Is this better?
It's fine.
No, I lost the place. Okay. Yeah, so the Patisambhida Magga, it's a commentarial style work, but from a very early period. So it's included in the Sutta Pitaka. And it gives a kind of very technical, detailed analysis of passages in the suttas. And so here it explains what is meant by the path. It says that the path arises, the path is generated. It simply uses the 8 factors of the path. So it says right view arises with the function of seeing, right thought arises with the function of fixing, directing the mind, and so on. And then it gives an explanation of the fetters that are abandoned and the latent tendencies or the underlying tendencies that are uprooted. So what are the fetters? So it says first, by the path of stream entry, the 3 fetters are abandoned. That's Sakkaya Ditthi, the view of a self in the 5 aggregates, doubt, and then Sila Bhatta Paramasa, clinging to rules and observances. So those 3 fetters are abandoned. And then the 2 latent tendencies are the tendency to views, to wrong views, and the tendency to doubt. So those are eliminated by the path of stream entry. Then by the next path, the path of once returner, none of the fetters are entirely eradicated, but it says that the coarse fetter of sensual lust and the coarse fetter of aversion or ill will, those 2 fetters are abandoned, and the underlying tendency of sensual lust and the underlying tendency of aversion, those 2 tendencies are eliminated. Then by the path of the non-returner, the subtle fetter of sensual lust and the subtle fetter of aversion, those 2 fetters are abandoned. And then the subtle latent tendency of sensual lust and the subtle latent tendency of aversion, those 2 latent tendencies are eliminated. And then by the 4th path, the path of Arahantship, craving for existence in the form realm, craving for existence in the formless realm, conceit, restlessness, and ignorance, those 5 fetters are abandoned. And then 3 latent tendencies are eliminated. The latent tendency to conceit, the latent tendency of craving for existence, and the latent tendency of ignorance. those three latent tendencies are eliminated. So we actually have certain factors, mental factors or defilements, which from one point of view are classified as fetters in the sense that they bind beings to the cycle of repeated birth and death. And from another perspective, they are called anusaya, latent tendency, in the sense that they remain sleeping or lying in the mind stream of living beings, and then they're aroused when they meet the suitable conditions or some kind of provocation. Okay, so anyway, the point that I want to make here is that in this first method, one develops serenity first, and serenity is another term for samadhi or concentration. So one develops strong concentration first. And the way the commentaries explain serenity, they usually, when serenity precedes insight, they explain it as the attainment of one or another of the jhanas, the meditative absorptions. And one sees an example of this method of practice, maybe in a sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya. How is the size of the type now?
Very good, Bhante.
Okay. Okay, so this is a sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya, sutta number 64. It's the Mahamalankya Putta Sutta. And here the Buddha is explaining the path or practice for eliminating the 5 lower fetters, that is, the fetters that are eliminated at the stage of non-returner. So he says that, I'll be translating the Pali. I have the Pali text here, but I'll be translating it. So here, with the abandoning of unwholesome states and so forth, a monk enters and dwells in the first jhana. So this is the attainment of serenity, at least the initial stage, the first jhana. Then whatever factors are involved there or included there that pertain to material form, that pertain to feeling, that pertain to perception, pertain to the mental formations, pertain to consciousness. He contemplates those factors, those dhammas, as being impermanent, as being bound up with suffering, as being a disease, a boil, a dart, as miserable, as an affliction, as alien, as disintegrating, as empty, as not self. And as he is contemplating things in that way, then he turns his mind away from those things and focuses the mind on the deathless element. And if he is firm in that, then he reaches the destruction of the asavas, the destruction of the taints. But if he doesn't attain the destruction of the taints, then he eliminates the 5 lower fetters and takes rebirth in the form realm, and then attains final nirvana there without coming back from that world. So that is serenity or samadhi coming first, followed by insight. And then when the insight reaches its maturity, then comes the attainment of the world transcending path. And then the same procedure is explicated in regard to the second jhana, third jhana, fourth jhana, Then the lower three formless meditations, the base of the boundlessness of space, the base of the boundlessness of consciousness, the base of nothingness. So in each case, the meditator first attains that level of meditative absorption, then develops insight, and through insight eradicates the defilements and gains one of the stages of liberation. Another sutra in a similar, it gives a different perspective on the similar approach, is in the Majjhima Nikaya. This is sutra number 52, spoken by the Venerable Ananda. And so a lay person has come to Venerable Ananda and asked them how a monk can attain the supreme security from bondage. In other words, can attain liberation. Then Ananda says that first the monk enters and dwells in the first jhana, and then he reflects that this first jhana is something which is constructed, which is produced or fashioned through volition. And then he understands that whatever is mentally constructed, put together, or fashioned through volition is impermanent and subject to cessation. So that you could say is the insight. And then if he's firm in that, then he reaches the destruction of the taints. But if he doesn't reach the destruction of the taints, then he attains the stage of the non-returner. So Ananda explains this first in regard to the four jhanas. Then he adds the four Brahma Viharas, the four boundless states of mind, boundless loving kindness, boundless compassion, boundless altruistic joy, and boundless equanimity. So in this case, first one enters and dwells into one or another of those boundless states of mind. Then one contemplates that boundless state of mind as something mentally constructed, put together, or produced through volition, and therefore it's impermanent and subject to cessation. And on that basis, one attains the destruction of the taints or the supreme security from bondage. And then Ananda adds the lower three formless meditative attainments. So again, this illustrates the method of serenity first, followed by insight. And that is, we could say, the standard or dominant model of the sequence of practice. But the second reverses the sequence. So here, the text says that the practitioner, in this case the monk, develops serenity preceded by insight. This means that insight comes first, and then serenity follows upon that insight. And so as he is developing insight first and then serenity, then the path is generated. And when the path arises, he cultivates it, and as he's cultivating the path, then the fetters are abandoned and the underlying or latent tendencies are uprooted. And then the commentary is not so helpful here. It just says, this is a person who naturally gains insight, but based on insight, he then produces concentration. But this seems to be the particular paradigm or model that governs the system developed in contemporary times in Burma and has been sort of popularized by Mahasi Sayadaw. So now it's known as the Mahasi method or the Mahasi system, where one doesn't make a deliberate effort to develop samadhi, but one begins by mindfully attending to the different factors of experience as they arise from moment to moment. So it applies mindfulness. Usually one uses an anchor object, a base or foundation object, the rising and falling of the abdomen. But then one notes whatever occurs during the course of the practice. If one hears a sound, one makes the mental note hearing, hearing. If one feels some sensation in the body, if it's a pain, one notes pain, pain. If it's a cool sensation, one notes cool, cool. If it's a tingling sensation, tingling, tingling. If it's a hot flash, heat, heat. If one is remembering something, one notes remembering, remembering. If one is planning, one notes planning, planning. So whatever occurs, one makes that mental note with mindfulness. And so this is applying mindfulness to every arising factor of experience. And as one is noting with mindfulness, every bodily or mental phenomena that occurs, one is, in a sense, one is starting to develop insight into the changing processes of body and mind. But what comes along with that repeated mindful noting of the experience is that the mind becomes focused and concentrated. It's not absorption concentration, not that the mind becomes one-pointedly fixed upon a single unchanging object. The object is always changing, arising and passing, but the mind remains focused and concentrated and fixed upon the ever-changing process of experience. And that is what counts for concentration or samadhi within that system. And so it's not really, even though the text says one develops insight first and then serenity, it's not actually the case that one gains the insight knowledges first and then samadhi comes afterwards, but rather one begins the practice that leads directly to insight. And in the course of that practice leading to insight, that is mindfully attending to the changing phenomena of the five aggregates, in the course of that practice of mindful noting, which will lead to insight, samadhi or concentration arises through the mental noting. But that concentration is not the absorption concentration of the jhana, but it is what is called, mainly in the sub-commentaries, it is called Khanika Samadhi. That is momentary concentration. Not because the concentration lasts just one moment and then the mind is scattered, but rather that the concentration is fixed upon each changing moment of experience, or is fixed upon the particular phenomena that are occurring at a given moment of experience. Okay, so that would be the model of serenity preceded by insight. In other words, insight first, or more correctly, we would say the way I would formulate this, mindful contemplation which leads to momentary concentration, which leads to the insight knowledges. So that's the way I would interpret this. Okay, then the third method that is mentioned here, or the third approach, it's expressed as one develops serenity and insight in conjunction. I just want to ask, are you seeing the English text from my PDF of the Book of
Yes,
Forms?
Bhante.
Yeah.
Okay. The Pali expression that's used here is a very unusual expression, Yuganada, and I think it occurs only in the sutta, which is a bit strange because I don't think one finds this expression used in any of the discourses of the Buddha himself. And so the way the commentary explains this, it says that each time one attains a meditative attainment, like one of the jhanas, and then one emerges and explores that attainment by way of its constituent phenomena. And having explored the phenomena, then one goes on to the next attainment. And so first one enters the first jhana, then one emerges and investigates the phenomena included in the first jhana as impermanent, dukkha, as bound up with suffering, non-self. Then one goes into the second jhana, emerges, investigates it by way of impermanence, dukkha, non-self. And so one goes all the ways up to the base of neither perception nor non-perception. Yeah, the expression Yuganada itself means yuga. It's like the English word yoke, joined together. Like you yoke two things, you join them together. So yoga is yoked and nada is bound or tied. So tied together in a yoke. And so some people interpret the term to mean that in this mode of practice, serenity and insight occur simultaneously, so that one is in the jhana, but at the same time that one is in the jhana, one is practicing insight. But to me, that doesn't seem very feasible. One could see maybe it would be possible in the first jhana, because there's still vitakka and vichara, some thought and examination in the first jhana. But when you get to the second jhana and the higher jhanas, and there's no more thought, no more examination. So how could there be the investigation of things as being impermanent, dukkha, and non-self in the higher, while one is absorbed in the higher jhanas? Yeah, so anyway, so there are different ways of interpreting this expression.
Ante, may I ask a question?
Okay, you could ask the question.
You said mindful concentration.
I said mindful contemplation.
Oh, it's contemplation?
Yeah. One is noting with mindfulness what is occurring in the present moment.
Mindful, which leads to momentary.
Yeah. It leads to momentary concentration.
Okay, but
And
and then leads to
to the insight knowledges
Okay,
or
thank
insight wisdom.
you. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Okay, then the fourth method or approach that Ananda mentions, again, this is an extremely unusual expression, which I think one finds only in the suttas. And there's even some differences about the reading, but I translated it. First, let's see what the Pali expression is. Yeah, there are different readings. So the Pali Text Society has Damudacha Vigahita Manna, and the Burmese edition has Vigahitang Manasang, and the Sri Lankan edition has Vigahitang Manang. Anyway, I've translated this as the mind is seized by restlessness about the Dhamma. So that is the initial stage. And then it says, but then there comes a time when the mind becomes internally steady, composed, unified, and concentrated. And then the path arises. One cultivates that path, and as one does so, then the fetters are abandoned and the latent tendencies are uprooted. So what is really meant here? And from the sutta itself, there's no clear elaboration. The commentaries, even going back to the work called the Patisambhida Magga, takes this to be a case where the meditator is practicing insight meditation. And then what are called the corruptions of insight arise. I explained these during the Abhidhamma retreat in September. These are some like unusual phenomena that arise when one is entering the initial stages of insight. Like bright lights appear, where the mind becomes suffused with joy, ecstatic bliss, where the mind becomes very peaceful and tranquil. And then one misinterprets those experiences, and one becomes attached to them and delights in them and misinterprets them and takes them to be signs that one has reached some attainment. So that is what the commentary takes to be restlessness about the Dhamma. And then it says that one, at a certain point, one recognizes that those unusual phenomena are just distractions. One gives up the attachment to them, the delight in them, and then the mind becomes steady and settles down, and then one reaches the path. Yeah, that's the commentarial interpretation, but I would maybe understand this in a different way, my own personal interpretation. One finds in these suttas some accounts, rather remarkable accounts, of people, the disciples of the Buddha, who are not able to succeed in their practice and their meditation. They had a lot of distress, disturbance, agitation in the mind. But then something happened that sort of triggered the mind and caused all of those disturbances, distress, agitation to vanish. And then the mind settled down and very suddenly reached the state of liberation. My favorite example of this occurs in the Therigatha. These are the verses of the bhikkhuni, the nun disciples of the Buddha. And there's the verses of a nun, her name is Siha. Siha means lioness. Can you see the text okay?
Yes, Bhante.
Okay, I'll give sort of a free translation as I go through the verses. So she is relating her story. the story of her enlightenment. So she says, because of unwise attention, unskillful attention, my mind was overcome by sensual lust. Previously, I was always agitated, and I didn't have any control over my mind. The mind was just obsessed by the kilesas, by the defilements. It went along with the perception of beauty or of enjoyment. I didn't gain any peace of mind since my mind was under the control of lust. And this didn't happen just for a few days, but she said, I went around for 7 years. 7 years. I became thin and pale, and I lost my complexion. Whether by day or by night, I was so afflicted, and I didn't find any happiness. Wow, 7 years, not even a moment of happiness. So if you think you're having practice with your meditation and you think I'm ready to give myself up, I'm a hopeless case, always think of the Bhikkhuni Siha. So what is she going to do? 7 years, no peace of mind, not even a moment of happiness. So what does she decide to do? She says, then I took a rope
Right.
and I went deep into the forest. And I thought, it's better for me to hang myself than to go around in such a miserable state. And so she enters the forest, she finds a tree with a branch, probably she climbs up and she's standing on the branch and she says, I made a tight, what do you call it, a noose? I made a tight noose and I tied it to a branch of the tree. I then put the noose around my neck. So the noose is already around the neck. All she has to do is step off the branch and then she's gone. Suicide. But she says, I put the noose around my neck and then my mind was liberated. Isn't that a remarkable story?
Indeed.
Yeah, so I think this illustrates the case. The mind is seized by restlessness about the Dhamma. So she's striving really earnestly, making a full effort for 7 years, but the mind just won't settle down and become still. Always lustful thoughts are arising so that she becomes so desperate that she wants to put an end to everything. And then suddenly she puts the noose around her neck. Then probably on that occasion, just moments before stepping off the branch, her mind became steady, composed, unified, and concentrated. Then the path arose, and she didn't even have to develop the path over a period of time. But one moment the path arose, and then the next moment, the fetters were abandoned and the tendencies were rooted.
Where's it gone?
There's another story. Yeah, this comes in the Udana. It's the sutta number 10 in the Udana, the inspired utterances of the Buddha. There was an ascetic. This is a Waidao, an outside ascetic He's living along the coast, the west coast. So this is the area roughly around where Bombay or Mumbai is located now. And apparently he was doing some kind of ascetic practices and meditation practices. And he thought that he achieved arahantship. But then it said that some friendly spirit came to him and told him, you are not an arhat, and you're not even on the path to arahantship. And he was shocked when he heard that. But then he realized that this is the truth. I'm just deceiving myself about my attainment. And then he asked the spirit, is there in the world anybody who is a true arhat or on the path to arahantship? And then this friendly spirit told him, there is, near the city of Savatthi, there is a man, a teacher that they call the Buddha. He is the true arhat in the world, and he can teach you the path to arahantship. And so then immediately this ascetic named Bahya became full of such enthusiasm that he immediately set out on that long journey, hundreds of miles towards Savatthi. And he would have to go by foot. He doesn't book an airplane ticket, that doesn't call a car to drive him to Savatthi, but he has to travel by foot. And each night, he just spends one night along the way, wherever he stops. The next morning, he sets out walking again till he comes to Savatthi. He asks, where is the Buddha? Everybody points him to Jeta's Grove, to Anathapindika's monastery. He comes to the monastery, he sees the monks around and asks, where is the Buddha? And then the monks tell him, he's not here now. He's gone into the city on alms round. So Bahya leaves the monastery, comes to the city. Sravasti goes looking down the streets till he sees on one street a very serene, majestic ascetic walking from house to house with his alms. So Bahya comes up to him and says, Venerable, teach me the way to arahantship. And the Buddha says, this is not the time for a discussion. You could see I'm going on my alms round. A second time, Bahya asks, please teach me the way to arahantship. The second time, the Buddha rejects him and says, this is not the time. The third time, Bahya says, please teach me the way to arahantship. The third time, the Buddha says, this is not the time. Wait till I've collected my food and had my meal. In the afternoon, you could come to the monastery. You could meet me and we could have some discussion. But Bahya says, Venerable, I could die at any moment. I don't know how long I will live, when I will die. Please teach me the way to arahantship. And when Bahya says that, the Buddha recognizes that Bahya's faculties have now become very, very mature, very sharp. So the Buddha teaches him just one very concise statement, very difficult to understand. He says, in the seen, there should be only what is seen. In the heard, only what is heard. In what is sensed, only what is sensed. In what is known, only what is known. And when for you, Bahya, in the seen, there is only what is seen. In the sensed, in the cognized, only what is cognized, then you will not be that by which. When you are not that by which, then for you there will not be therein. When for you there is not therein, then there will be neither here nor there nor in between the two, and that itself is the end of suffering. So as soon as the Buddha said that, Bahia didn't have to go sit under a tree and focus his mind on the in and out breath or do mindful noting of phenomena. But as soon as the Buddha spoke those words, immediately, the text says, he attained arahantship right on the spot. So it seems in that case, when Bahia came traveling so eagerly over some maybe 800 miles, 1,000 miles, in order to see the Buddha, his mind was seized by restlessness about the Dhamma. And so then when the Buddha spoke that rather enigmatic statement to him, as soon as he heard that, his mind right on the spots became steady, composed, unified, and concentrated, and then he reached the path. And then through the path, then his fetters were abandoned, his tendencies were rooted, and he achieved arahantship. Okay, so these are the four methods that are explained by Venerable Ananda. Maybe I should take some questions now before we go further. I think you know how to ask questions using the hand symbol. Okay, Dayani,
Yeah, good morning, Bante. Namo
good
Buddhaya.
morning.
Based on these two stories, the Bhikkhuni Siha and the last one, it sounds to me that one can reach arahantship out of sudden. So there is no need like to go through stages from Sotapanna, Sakadagami, Anagami.
Yeah, from the story, that seems to be the case. But the way the commentary explains this, that each of these disciples went very quickly through the previous three stages. Almost you could say at lightning speed. They go first, path and fruit of stream entry, boom. Then right away, path and fruit of once returner, boom. Path and fruit of the non-returner, boom. Then path and fruit of arahantship, boom. So it's probably like within a split second, they go through all four stages.
Right.
That's the commentarial way, but if you just base on the sutta itself, it seems that they would go directly to the stage of arahantship.
Right. Thank you very much, Bante. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Okay, Dan Vasquez.
Yeah. Good morning, Bante. Thank you
Good
so
morning.
much. Yeah. Could you say a little bit more about the that phrase, there is nothing thereby or within that you're not.
Yeah,
What could you just elaborate on that, clarify that a little bit?
I have to say that those phrases in the original are so enigmatic that you have to interpret, I would say you have to interpret them in your own way, that probably there's no fixed explanation that's exactly right.
Do you have an interpretation?
Let me just get let me just expand. Yeah, so he uses It's just what's called, technically it's called the instrumental pronoun natena. Tena is by or by which, by that. Maybe what it means is that we usually identify ourselves with the sense faculties. So we take the sense faculties to be that by which we are experiencing the world. So one identifies with the eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind. So when you see in the scene only what is seen, then you don't identify with the sense faculties. And so when natena tato tvang natata, so when there is not that by which, then you not therein. So then when you're not identifying with the sense faculties, then you are not a self there in the world. And so when you are not therein, then you are not here in this world, nahurang, nor beyond, nor in between the two. And that itself is the end of dukkha.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Okay. Who attained arahantship? Why is it taking you so long? Okay, Sud, you could lower your hand.
Thank you for taking my question, Mante. So is it fair to say that when developing the path of, like when one is on the path of developing concentration first and then insight, all one needs is to develop the first jhana and then progress on the path to even ending the first 5 lower fetters?
Well, according to the works like the Visuddhimagga or the commentaries, if one is taking the path of developing serenity first, then insight, it would be sufficient to develop, there's a stage of samadhi even preceding the first jhana, which is called access concentration. In Pali, this is Upachara Samadhi. So Upachara is like the neighborhood, or you could say it's like the suburbs of a city. And so when you're getting close to the first jhana, the mind becomes sufficiently focused and absorbed in the object that one can use that samadhi as a basis for developing insight. So even that attainment of access concentration can be considered a sufficient degree of concentration for developing insight.
I see,
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, Vinyu?
Question. The place that where Ananda actually uttered this discourse was in Kosambi, and that there was another discourse by Arahanta at Majjhima Nikaya 128 Upakalisa Sutta. Is also at the same place.
Yeah.
Yes, and in that discourse, we can read that we learned that Arahanta basically went through a lot. That he tried very hard to attain the arahantship, and that Buddha was telling him the same thing, that when he was a bodhisattva. So could you elaborate a little bit of, because like just now you mentioned about the bhikkhuni and also Bahya, it seems that they have achieved that attain arahantship is like instantaneously. So whereas Venerable Ananda has been striving so hard. So you elaborate a little bit? Like, is it because of different beings, a person will have a different path? Because like it seems that some disciples were able to attain arahantship or get a stream entry so easily.
Yeah.
What are the qualities, or is it because of the punya, or because of the past life that's been accumulation? Could you probably?
Yeah, there are just so many factors involved that it's very difficult to give one explanation that fits all of the cases. In the case of Anuruddha, apparently Anuruddha, I would say, was probably one who develops samadhi first and then insight, because he would have developed at least the four jhanas, probably even going beyond the four jhanas to develop all of the 8 meditative absorptions, because he had the divine eye. And what's interesting is that Anuruddha, when he explains the method that he used to develop these supernormal powers, he always speaks about practicing the 4 foundations of mindfulness. One finds this in the Anguttara Nikaya. There's a chapter called the Anuruddha Samyutta.
Yeah.
And when the monks come to Anuruddha and say, how did you develop the divine eye or the other supernormal powers? He explains that he frequently would dwell in the 4 foundations of mindfulness.
Yeah.
Okay, Brenda. Brenda, yeah, you unmute.
Yes, Bhante. I wonder, I have 2 volumes related to the Therigatha. One is Tanjeff's, and he does not have the Siha poem, and the other is The First Free Woman, and it's very abbreviated. Do you have a recommendation for a translation that would go into the depth that you just explained?
Let's see. K.R. Norman has a complete translation of the Therigatha.
How do you spell Norman?
It's the initials K.R.
K.R. Norman.
Yeah. And then Norman. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, he is a philologist. I'm just trying to think. It's published by the Polytext Society, and I have to say their volumes are rather expensive. I'm trying to think if there's another easily accessible translation of the Therigatha.
I mean, your translation was so in-depth and beautiful in terms of understanding the practice. I love the poems in The First Free Women, but it doesn't have that kind of depth. So
she doesn't have the Siha Therigatha in it.
She has it, but it's extremely abbreviated. It doesn't talk about the restlessness or the investigation of the Dhamma. It just says, I got really good at being sad.
Yeah, well, I gave some elaboration, sort of like putting my mind into her mind.
Oh, okay.
Oh, there is a rather free translation that was published recently. It's not such a literal translation. This is by Matt Weingast.
Matt Weingast.
Yeah, let me see. I have it here. Let me just see if he has the translation of this. Just a moment.
Bhante, it's on page
Actually,
50.
wait.
It's page 50.
Yeah, but
Yeah, it's very free translation.
Bhante,
Yeah, it's very, very
Better
free.
one.
It's,
A better one.
what is a better one?
Yes. This is Jean. Charles Hallisey.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry. That's right.
It's
That
good.
is right.
Wonderful.
Yeah, Charles Hallisey.
He's teaching now Monday nights. BCBS. Barry Center.
I see. I see. Yeah, his is, I have his also.
Can you spell Hallisey?
Hallallis.
EY.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, let's see. Gita?
Thank you, Bhante.
Morning, Bhante. Thank
Good
you for the
morning.
teaching. Thank
Yeah.
you. I just wanted to find out the most important lesson from these examples that you have provided today, Bhante, would be to keep practicing with diligence and not to give up and not to get discouraged. Is this correct?
I would say that is the lesson from the story of Siha. And yeah, not to be discouraged, especially if you have trouble, agitation, worry, disturbance in the mind. Because how did she attain arhatship so quickly? I'm getting some feedback. I hear the echo of my voice coming. Okay, so when she would have been practicing over the years, and it seemed to her that she wasn't making much progress, but actually her practice would have been strengthening her disposition towards samadhi and probably developing flashes of insight, which were gradually sort of building up within the deep layers of her consciousness. So then when she confronted that choice on the spot of the moment of jumping off the branch and committing suicide, when that was or continuing to live on, that would have been the event that sort of pushed her over the cliff, not towards suicide, but towards arhatship.
Thank you, Bhante.
Yeah, so maybe what really helps to strengthen the faculties is to do, even for short periods each day, to do the mindfulness or recollection of death, because that helps to stir up a sense of, we call samvega, a sense of urgency. Okay.
Bhante, I don't see how to put the little hand up, but I would just wanted to say, isn't it similar to when Ananda achieved arahantship just as he was sitting down?
Yeah, that's also a good example.
Yeah.
Yeah, Ananda also was maybe fit into that category. Like he was practicing, this was after the Buddha passed away, he was striving to attain arhatship because the elders who were going to hold the first Buddhist council needed Ananda to participate, because Ananda was the one who knew by memory all of the discourses of the Buddha. But a precondition for participating was to be an arhat. And Ananda at that point was only a stream enterer, a sotapanna. And so they told Ananda, we're going to start the council on such and such a day, and you have to attain arhatship by then. And so Ananda practiced very, very diligently, day after day, week after week, but he couldn't achieve arhatship. And then on the last day before the council, he practiced very diligently through the day and then through the first part of the night. Then in the middle of the night, he thought, I'm not getting it. I might as well just relax and get some hours of sleep. And then he relaxed his mind and went to lie down on the bed. And it said that when his body hit the bed before his head reached the pillow and before he lifted his legs up onto the bed, then his mind was liberated. Okay, we'll take two more questions. So one is Lim.
Yeah, morning, Bhante.
Good morning.
Yeah, the thing is, in the sutta, is there mention that which method we should adopt for samatha or vipassana?
Maybe I'm going to come, we could take that topic next week.
Ah, okay.
This week I thought it would take me 15 minutes to go through this sutta, number 170, and then we would spend the rest of the class on the suttas in the 90s. But now I haven't gotten to the suttas in the 90s at all. So we'll take those next week. And maybe that question would be more relevant for next week. Okay, sure. Diane, again, you have a second turn.
Yes, Bhante, thank you. I would like to ask about the momentary concentration, Bhante. So in the meditation, sometimes we experience a moment of very focused, but then it was gone and the mind was distracted elsewhere. Was it the momentary concentration or it is not that, Bhante?
I think you could call that a momentary concentration, but that is not really the momentary concentration that is the basis for the arising of the insight knowledges. The momentary concentration that is the basis for the insight knowledges is said that the mind is focused unshakably on the object as if it were in a jhana, as if it were in a state of absorption, except that the object, in a jhana, the object remains always the same, the single object. Whereas in the momentary concentration, the object is a bodily or mental phenomena, which is always changing.
I see. Okay, so
but the mind remains steady in its focus on the object.
Right. Thank you, Bhante. So, so it sounds like to me the momentary concentration is similar to Upachara Samadhi.
It's similar to the Upachara Samadhi, except that in the actual Upachara Samadhi, it's based on an object that naturally leads to the jhanas. And so it's a concentration that is approaching the jhanas, but hasn't reached that level of absorption. Whereas with momentary concentration, the mind is not taking an object that leads to the jhanas, but it's taking the changing phenomena of body and mind as the object.
Right. Thank you very much, Bhante. I appreciate this.
Yeah. Okay, I think we will have to end now. And just some announcements. Let's see. So first, the regular announcements of the announcement about the regular activities. So on Sunday evening, we have online group meditation led by Venerable Mangala. That's from 7 to 8 p.m. with an additional half hour from 8 to 8:30 for questions related to the practice. Then on Wednesday evenings, and I conduct the group meditation online from 7 to 8 p.m. And then this month, well, actually, it's not yet November. In November, after Thanksgiving Day, that's Friday, Saturday, and Sunday after Thanksgiving, we'll be conducting online a 3-day retreat based on the 4 protective meditations. That's the recollection of the Buddha, loving kindness, the parts of the body, 32 parts of the body, and mindfulness of death. And you can sign up if you go to the website for the Buddhist Association. You'll find the panel for this retreat, and you could sign up through that panel, and then you'll get the information that you need. You'll find the schedule of the retreat and the supplementary materials. Okay, so let us then end with the sharing of the merits. Okay, so we'll recite the verses for sharing the merits with the devas, the nagas, the spirits, and so forth. Akasa ta chabumata deva naga mahitika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu sasanam. Akasa ta chabumata deva naga mahitika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu desanam. Akasa ta chabumata deva naga mahitika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu mankarang. Etavata cham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe deva anumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Etavata cham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe bhuta anumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Etavata cham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe sata anumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Pavagupadaya avici hetato etantare satakaya upapanna rupya rupicha asanya sanino tukha pamuchantu pusantu nibuting.
Sadhu, sadhu,
Sadhu, sadhu,
sadhu.
Okay,
sadhu.
so thank you all.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Bante.
Bante.
Thank you, Bante.
Thank you, Bante.
you,
Sadhu,
Bante.
Thank you,
Bante.
Bante. Have a good
Thank
week,
you very
everyone.
much, Bante.
Thank you,
Take care,
Bante.
Bante.
Thank you,
Okay.
Bante.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Bante.
dear
Enjoy a beautiful
Bante.
day.
Thank
Enjoy
you.
the
Wonderful to see you,
Thank you,
Bante.
Okay.
Bante.
Thank you. Be
I
safe.
think
Bye.
Take
Be
care.
Okay.
safe.
Okay. Bye bye.
bye.
Thank
See
you.
you
Bye.
here.
Bye.
It's laughing.
Everyone, Saranai Swaminathan.
Thank you,
Okay.
everyone.
Thank you,
Bye.
Bante.
You're embarrassing me.
No.
Don't forget to vote.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
that's very
Oh,
important.
yes,
Very
yes,
important.
please,
Yes.
everyone.
Yeah.
Don't
Yeah,
forget to
very,
vote.
very important.
Bye.
Okay.
Bye, Bante.
Okay.
Thank
Bye bye.
you.
Bye. Bye, everyone.
Seeing you with the best wishes.